So the first thing we want to talk about is how unusual this blessing is. These blessings are. Why do I say that? You know what? Let's start somewhere else. Let's start with our custom to read the parsha in a nutshell. The summaries. We'll read the summary, and then we'll start with the commentary. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. We're going to do some summary here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to skip the reading of Sukkot here. On Simchat Torah, second paragraph. On Simchat Torah, rejoicing of the Torah, we conclude and begin anew the annual Torah reading cycle. First, we read the Torah. First, we read the Torah section of Vzot Habracha, which recounts the blessings that Moses gave to each of the 12 tribes of Israel before his death, echoing Jacob's blessings to his 12 sons 5 generations earlier. Moses assigns and empowers each tribe with its individual role within the community of Israel. Vzot Habracha then relates how Moses ascended Mount Nebo, from whose summit he saw the promised land. And Moses, and this is a quote from the Torah, and Moses, the servant of God, died there in the land of Moab by the mouth of God, and no man knows his burial place to this day. The Torah concludes by attesting that there arose no prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom God knew face to face, and all the mighty hand and the great awesome things which Moses did before the eyes of all Israel. Okay, and then on Simchat Torah, we also begin to read Genesis, but then we'll read the entire Genesis, the entire first portion of Genesis next, a week from Shabbat. Okay, why did I say that this parsha is so unusual and so strange? Because of what it comes in connection to, in continuation to. All of the book of Deuteronomy, which now we're the conclusion, is Moshe's speech that he gave beginning 37 days before he passed away. And in the beginning of the book is essentially a warning to remain loyal to the Torah, but all throughout the book, and it gets more and more intensified. In the beginning, it's the fear, and later it's the prediction that the Jewish people will come into the land of Israel, they will become successful, they will become wealthy, and what will happen is they're going to forget about Hashem, they're going to forget about God, and they're going to reject God, and the result of that is the exile. The result of that is the destruction of the land. And at the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, it almost says that, well, be careful that this should not happen. As you move on to the book of Deuteronomy, it becomes more and more, this is what's going to happen. Almost like a prediction, almost like we know this is going to happen. To the extent that last week's parsha, Ha'azinu, is the song. The only part of Deuteronomy that's not Moses' own words, but it's the song that God tells Moses to sing to the people and teach to the people. And there, it's unequivocal. This is what's going to happen. Israel's going to come into the land, be successful, rebel against God, and the calamities will follow. Eventually, there'll be reconciliation. So that's the positive part. But all through Deuteronomy, you have the scene, and especially at the end, especially last parsha, we know that this is almost a tragedy. We know what's going to happen. The wealth is that was last week, and this is a commandment from Hashem that Moshe teach this song that we read last week to all the people. Okay. Now Moshe gets his own microphone. And the opening statement of this parsha is, this is the blessing that Moses, man of God, spoke to the people. It's not clear what we know. Moses, the man of God, we know what's the emphasis here. But it could be what it's really telling you is that Moses is actually departing from what Hashem said. Hashem's vision for what's going to happen is that the people will be successful, and the material success inevitably leads to rebelling against God. Moshe's seen, then you read Moses' blessings. There's no such tension. Many of the tribes are blessed with material wealth, and Moshe keeps repeating that this material wealth is part and parcel of their connection to Hashem. What happened here? Moshe is presenting a vision where material success does not distract you from a connection to holiness, but in fact, that the material success actually enhances the connection to Hashem. And we'll see that as we go along, how Moshe emphasizes it again and again, that the blessing is actually, the people are connected to God despite the blessing. Now, if you just read this parsha in isolation, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Why not? But if you see the scene that the entire book how Moshe, the theme of the entire book, especially toward the end, and there is this sort of this terrible fear that the blessing is going to be a source, the material blessing will be a source of disconnection. And then Moshe says it doesn't have to be that way. So Moshe is interpreting God's words. When God said it's going to happen, it doesn't mean it has to happen. It means it's likely to happen. But that's not the vision. That's not the vision of Judaism. That's not the goal. That's not what we believe is inevitable. And it keeps emphasizing that the blessing is consistent with the will of God. And he does that again and again. And hopefully we can show a little bit of that as we go along. So that is introduction number one.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I remember a minister saying to me one time, when economic times are tough, he can count on the fact that more people show up in church.
Right. So that is a good point. Many people turn to God when there's desperation or difficulty, and that's the reality. The reality is when a person feels independent, when a person feels like they have everything they need, they're not turning anywhere else. That is human nature, but that's human nature. But we're supposed to sort of, I don't want to say battle that, but the goal is supposed to be that we get the blessing and we recognize that the blessing comes from Hashem. And therefore the blessing actually brings us closer to God, which by the way is the theme of Sukkot, because we're sitting in a sukkah right now. And I said this a few times this week, but Sukkot is an absolutely absurd concept because we're celebrating what the Torah refers to as Chag HaAsif, the holiday of the ingathering. And what we're really saying is that in the beginning of the summer and spring, you have the harvest. So that's of the grain. Shavuot is the harvest. And then they would let the food to let it out in the field to dry, so it could last through the winter, shouldn't rot. So all summer, the fruit and the produce is drying. And then the end of the summer, you bring it into your home. And Sukkot is the time where all your produce is in your home, in your storehouses, in your home, in your basement, wherever you put it. And now you know you have enough food for the next 6 months until the next crop ripens. So now you're happy. And the holiday, Chag HaAsif, the holiday of the ingathering. And what does the Torah say on the holiday of the ingathering? Go outside. Well, 1 second. I just brought everything inside the house. Where do I want to be? I want to be in my home. I don't want to be outside. No. You bring everything in the home. You go outside. That's absurd. Well, that's the whole point, according to one interpretation. In other words, one way of looking at the holiday, that's the point of the holiday. The point of the holiday is to understand that all the blessing that I have in my house is not the source of my comfort. It's not the source of my security. It's not what I put my trust in. I go outside and recognize that I'm under the protection of Hashem. I'm under the sky. I don't have a permanent shelter. I'm commemorating the fact that God protects us. And specifically in the season of the ingathering, when the human nature is to say, I am self-sufficient. I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. And Judaism is really a practice of it's an exercise, especially on Sukkot, but always is to recognize the gratitude to Hashem that we get the blessing. We are partners in the blessing, but we're not the only partner in the blessing. And the blessing is supposed to be the gratitude of the blessings could bring us closer. But you are right that many times it doesn't. But the point is that that's what Moshe is saying here. Moshe is the underlying theme. If I say, what is the one takeaway from this entire blessing? There'll be beautiful blessings, beautiful poetry, many teachings, many lessons. But what's the underlying point? The underlying point is that Moshe is actually departing from what we said earlier. Moshe is departing from the model that the model of success breeds rebellion, indifference, rebellion, and then exile. But no, here Moshe is saying success and blessing and bounty breed connection to Hashem. And it's our choice how we want to live our life.
Rabbi, is there a dimension of Kabbalah that says, based on what you're saying, that we should never become too comfortable? Because if we get too comfortable, we move away from God and just assume that we don't need God, and that we should always be a bit uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, yeah, there is a dimension of that. That's also part of the teaching of Sukkot, on the idea of we live in a temporary dwelling. So the lesson would be that don't think of yourself as permanent in one state of being. And permanence seems, at first glance, it seems a very good place to be. I finally got home. I finally settled. I finally filled my bank account. I finally built my home. I achieved a certain amount, a degree of permanence. But permanence, first of all, has a spiritual danger, but it even has a practical danger. If someone is too permanent, they're not looking out for potential threats. They're not looking out for potential even opportunities, right? In today's climate, you know that with the world changing, any company that just wants to continue doing what it's doing, even if it's on the top of their industry, the world is always changing. If they're permanent, they're going to be out of business. They could be a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar company. They'll be out of business in no time because things change and life changes and things are dynamic. And the Jew understood when Jewish people came to a new place, they understood. They always have the idea, because of the culture, because of our history, that there's a certain degree there's a certain degree of being of a temporary dwelling, and in some sense that is a blessing, because that concept of temporary allows you to view and question and also rethink and recalibrate and say, where am I going? Is this the place where I'm going? But if I'm too permanent, then I'm stuck in my ways. And that's not a place good. It's not a good place to be, neither physically, but also spiritually. So that's something we have to counter and figure out, what is our permanence? What is our anchor? What are we bound to? And what is temporary? What could change? And in that sense, we have to be flexible, because if not, we're almost stuck and we don't have room for the growth. Go ahead, Baruch, please.
Yeah. One of these days I'll change it to my English name. But no, I think it's wonderful, a lot of wisdom there, because you have to, not only you could think about this all day, every day, but unless you physically remove yourself from your home and go outside, you don't get the perspective. And it's I think that just reinforces the whole idea, and that's why the tradition is that strong, is that you have to physically move and physically feel and touch, and instead of just discuss it and hear it. That's interesting. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I agree.
Bye.
Yes. So Judaism is a big believer in. Yeah, thank you, Barry. Judaism is a big believer in action, and how action is. Yeah, we did hear you, but I think I'm going to go inside because I think the connection is getting a little choppy. But we definitely Judaism does believe about many commandments that when you do it, that has a much deeper effect on the psyche. Okay, so give me just one moment, and I will. Okay, maybe that's part of the message, that you can't be too permanent in the sukkah anywhere. I want it to be in the sukkah, but then if I can't hear you, then you got to be able to pick up and move. So Jews know how to pick up and move, and pick up and change and adapt. So that's what we're doing.
True.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Baruch is better.
Okay, we'll use both.
Amazing. Okay, let's do a little bit of maybe some of the details of the tribes. The first thing I like to do, and I may have done this in the past, is to think about the order. Let's think about the order in which the Moshe talks about the tribes. So it's actually very interesting, because let's think about, if you want to think about the order, nobody knows exactly. It's not clear why he chooses this order. So I'm gonna maybe we'll run through the order very quickly, and we'll try to think about what the order is. So the expectation would be that the order would be that the blessing would be by age. In other words, talk about the oldest and go down to the youngest, maybe the most prominent, but it's not clear the order. And in a minute, we'll show what the order is, or give a suggestion of what the order is. But first, I just want to do very quickly, maybe Parsha text. Very quickly, if we, let's run a quick survey. Just sort of, I'm going to try to very quickly read a little bit about all the blessings of the 12 of the 12 tribes. Hide Rashi's, oh no, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay, let's see if we can figure this out. All Parshas. Habracha. Parsha text. Type of reading. Here we go. Okay, so this is the blessing that Moshe gives. You have an introduction that goes for about 5 verses. Okay, start with Reuven. May Reuven live and not die, and may his people be counted in the number. Okay, so Reuven is the oldest. Makes sense. Then you jump to Judah. May this also be for Judah. And he, Moses, said, O Lord, hearken to Judah's voice and bring him to his people. May his hands do battle for him, and may you be help against his adversaries. So Judah gets the blessing of Hashem should listen to him, and may his hands do battle for him. That would make sense, because Judah is the ancestor of King David, the king, the Judean kings, and one of the most important functions of the king was national security, and that were the battles. Okay, next. The Levite, and Levite is the priests. So there's actually, they get a very long blessing, verse 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, they get 4 blessings, and you see your Tumim and your Urim. Urim and Tumim are the breastplate that the high priest wore on his chest. And then he talks about, for example, verse 10, they shall teach your ordinances to Jacob and your Torah to Israel. They shall place incense before you and burnt offerings upon your altar. So Levi is the priests. Benjamin, and Benjamin, he said, the Lord's beloved one shall dwell securely beside him. He protects him all day long, and he dwells between his shoulders. What does that mean? The temple was in the border of, was in the side of, in the section of Benjamin, literally the border between Judah and Benjamin. Okay, gets a little bit more in. We continue. Joseph has a long blessing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blessing, five verses, talks about the sweetness of the land. His land shall be blessed by the Lord, with the sweetness of the heavens with dew, and with the deep that lies below, meaning the deep water. Keeps going about the produce, and also the leadership at the end, likens him to an ox. We don't have time for that right this second. Maybe we'll come back to it. Zvulun, he says, rejoice, Zvulun, in your departures, and Yisachar in your tents. Basically, Zvulun departs, he's in commerce. Then we have Gad. We'll get to that later. And then finally, we have Dan, is a young lion streaming from Bashan. Naphtali, he said, is a favorably satisfied and full of the Lord's blessings, possesses the sea and the south. So Naphtali, the commentaries explain, we're talking about again the fertility of his land. You can go to the Ginusar Valley right outside when he says the sea means the Sea of the Galilee, right? It's south of the Sea of the Galilee was the section of Naphtali, and there you have beautiful produce. Asher, may Asher be blessed with sons. He will be pleasing to his brothers and immerse his foot in oil.
Sure, that's it.
Immerse your foot in oil would be the expression of expressing wealth, right? You have so much oil that you can actually immerse your feet in oil instead of in water. I'm not saying it's a great idea, but it's certainly a metaphor for how much oil you have. We're not talking about petroleum, we're talking about olive oil. So again, that goes back to the fertility of the land. Okay, beautiful blessings. Okay, what's happening? Why this order? What's happening? So the first thing we want to show is the theory that's probably correct. I don't see any reason to say it's not correct. And for that, I'm going to switch to another picture from Wikipedia. It's maybe not be perfect, but it's more or less accurate. And that is the map of the 12 tribes of Israel, the way they were divided when they came into the land of Israel. And if you look at this map, it's not perfect, but you look at this map and you see, oh, 1 second, maybe this is the order of which Moshe blesses his people. So in other words, Moshe's order is really telling to the order of how the land will be divided. And it starts from the south and it goes up. The last one we said, Asher, who's going to dip his feet in oil, that's Asher. Now, Asher, the biblical land of Israel, if you see in this thing, goes way into Lebanon. Doesn't go as south as the modern day Israel, doesn't go down to Eilat, just a little south of Be'er Sheva is the southern border, but the northern border goes way into Lebanon. And these lands are very fertile. And it also goes into Jordan, by the way, the east bank of the Jordan. But Asher is the last one. Naphtali second to last. Zevulun is on the sea of the Galilee. So it's not perfect here, but it's more or less the same. Then Joseph gets a big portion. You start from the south. First thing we said is Judah and Reuven. By the way, what we don't have is Shimon. Moshe did not bless the tribe of Simon explicitly. Why that is another story. Because they caused the sin at the terrible sin at the end of Moshe's life. But what's fascinating is if you go back to the portion, he alludes to the tribe of Shimon. How so? The word Shimon means to listen. It comes from the root shma. So read the Hebrew words. Vzot Yehuda. This is for Judah. Vayomar, and he said, Shema Hashem kol Yehuda. Hearken God to the voice of Judah. Shema is Shimon. So Shimon's blessing is within Judah's blessing. And the commentaries point out, interesting, Simon's portion of the land is within Judah's. Just like his blessing is surrounded by Judah's, his portion is surrounded by Judah's. Why that's significant is everything I'm saying is significant, even if I didn't explain how come. Simon has a certain quality of wrath, and it has to be tempered by Judah. That's what the commentaries explain. So we can get to that. But the bottom line is they're a partnership, but Judah has to be dominant. And that's why even in the blessing, they're surrounded. So basically, you see that a very important way to understand the blessings of the 12 tribes is simply to look at the map. Then you understand what Moshe is trying to do. This map is not perfect because here you have Dan on the sea. Even in modern Israel, they call this area the region around Tel Aviv, Gush Dan, the cluster of Dan. In the Bible, it says that Dan really got a section right up here. You see, it says Dan up here. The bottom line is they weren't too happy up here, so they also came down to the sea. But Moshe, we're counting Dan as up here. And we could talk about Dan's blessing, what it means. It says Dan will shoot forth from the Bashan. Basically, the commentaries explain we're referring to in Dan are the rivers that feed the Jordan, the Kinneret and then the Jordan. So Dan is coming out. In Arabic they call it Bamyas. Banyas is one of the rivers. There's basically three rivers, if I remember correctly. There's that river called Dan, a spring called Dan, a spring called Banyas, and there's one more, Chatzbani. There are three, and Rashi says that it's referring to those rivers that emerge from Dan like a snake. And that doesn't say snake, it leaps forward. Let's see what he says. Let's read Rashi's interesting Rashi here. Uladan Amar. Let's see Rashi. And to Dan he said, Dan is a young lion streaming from Bashan, a lion. What does it mean? Well, he's on the border, so he needs to have strength like a lion. That's the first Rashi. Then he says, read Rashi here, streaming from the Bashan. This is to be understood as the Targum Onkelos renders it. His land drinks from the rivers that flow from Bashan. For the Jordan River comes out from Dan's territory, from the Penyas cave, Pamayas. Today they call it Banyas, but he calls it Pamyas, okay? Which is a place called Leshem. Okay, we continue. So you see, that's the point. The point is that they're going to jump from the rivers flow from Bashan and feed the Jordan. And then he says, why are they jumping? So Rashi has this whole long Rashi to explain how they took two sections. They were not satisfied up north. They also went by the sea. So that's why here they're writing down here, but biblically speaking, they were here as well. Okay, so what's happening? We're starting from the south, going up to the north. Okay, wonderful. If you think about the blessings, you will see that the blessings for physical fertility of the land and physical blessings and abundance, they start around over here. In other words, Menashe and up. Ephraim is part of Joseph. So these two, it's Joseph. Menashe and Ephraim are Joseph. So it's basically Benjamin is still considered, I would say, from over here, you start getting blessings for fertility. Fertility of the land, the produce of the land is blessed. Before then, there's no blessing for produce of the land. Before then, what you have is leadership, kingship. We talk about Levi, even though Levi is not on this map because they don't get a portion in the land. But Levi was congregated around the temple for the most part. So we talked about Levi, which were the priests and the Torah teachers. We talked about Benjamin, where the temple is. Temple is on the border of Benjamin and Judah. And then we talked about Judah as also leadership. Okay, so what do we see from this map? So one way to think about it is quite literally what this map shows is that material success cannot be the foundation of our life. Because if material success is the foundation, if that's your anchor, then it's going to remove you away from Hashem. Material blessing is only a blessing if it's above the foundation. And the foundation is a spiritual anchor. Foundation is connection to Hashem. Foundation is leadership. Foundation is the priest and the Levite and the Torah teacher and the leader. Above that, once that is established, now you could start talking about the bounty of starting with Joseph, Menashe, and Ephraim. You see, Menashe has a tremendous section of land, and the produce and the sweetness of the produce, et cetera, and all the wine and all the fruit that grow around the Kinneret in Naphtali's territory, in the Ginusar Valley, and Zevulun's excursions to the sea to do commerce. All that is wonderful, but it cannot be the foundation. Even literally, the geography of Israel shows you, starting from the bottom, the foundation were the tribes dedicated to leadership, spirituality, Torah study, and service of God. Above that, you can have the physical blessing. And I think in our life, it's the same. And that's why in our day, it's supposed to be constructed in the sense that the beginning of the day, we dedicate a moment to thank Hashem. It can be saying the Shema. It could be saying Modani, thanking God for giving us, returning the soul to us, giving us health. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a long time, but the foundation is something spiritual. Once the foundation is something spiritual, then the blessing that will follow rests on something positive and on an anchor, and then it will be blessed because that's not what I'm serving. The blessing is serving my values, not the other way around. Not that my values are shaped by the blessing I have, by the material success I have. So that's a very important thing, just to see the order of if you want to understand the order of the blessings, and also maybe the meaning of placing. You could say that, well, it's just natural because up north is where you have more fertility in the land. Yes, of course it's natural. It's natural, but again, that itself could be an indication of a spiritual truth. The reason why the land of the topography of the land of Israel is set up this way is that is a reflection of a spiritual truth. Go ahead, Baruch. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, very, very interesting. It's like the triangle chart, the nutrition chart that you see, the foundation with the grains and all that. But so you're saying it's like a north-south issue. It has nothing to do with the size of the tribes occupied.
It has a little bit to do with the size of the tribes. Menashe were very large, but it also has to do with the fertility. You don't need a lot of land. Judah has a big section of land, but you can't grow a lot there, right? A lot of it is desert. So it has to do, if you're Asher, you don't need a massive section. If you're Asher all the way on top, you just need a few olive trees. And if the land is fertile, you can create enough wealth and you can create enough sustenance. So is
there any remnants in like Gad and Reuben over in Jordan now that can be like seen from those tribes? Or is there anything?
No, because the 12
over there.
The history is that the history is that.
Do you understand my question?
The history is that eventually the kingdom splits, and you have Judah and Benjamin become their own kingdom, and the northern tribes become their own kingdom. And then about 2,700 years ago, the 10 tribes were taken to exile. So all these tribes first the tribes east of the Jordan, and then the tribes of the northern kingdom were basically exiled from Israel, and to some degree they were lost.
I guess what I'm trying to say, they were lost because like the movie just came out, the Biblical Highway, Route 60 goes right up Israel. But can you go over into Jordan and see stuff over there?
Today you can't, but we believe that according to Torah's account, actually the burial spot of Moses is somewhere in God, somewhere here, the burial spot of Moses. So something that important to us is actually in Jordan, but it was biblical. It was part of biblical Israel. There's no question about it. It's all recounted in the fifth book of the Torah, in the book of Numbers, fourth book of the Torah, the book of Numbers, where they had the conquest of all those lands east of the Jordan, and how Moses himself, that's actually something Moses did. He put 2.5 tribes. He gave them their settlement east of the Jordan, 2.5 tribes, Reuven, Gad, and half of Menashe.
Interesting. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin.
Rabbi, do you end at 11? I want to make sure because I don't want to keep scheduling patients at 11 if you go to 11:15. So
we're still experimenting. I used to do 10 to 11. Then I have to move it to 10:15 this year because of the traffic patterns on the 287.
Okay, but when does it end? Because I don't want to schedule a patient, which I think 11:15 or 11.
So it's not, it's undecided. If you have it, you can make your influence by sharing your preference. And because we're undecided, your words can have a lot of power. So you tell me what you like.
Well, today, unfortunately, I have to leave 11. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I want to do maybe another 2-3 minutes just to conclude the Torah in an interesting way. One of the ways of studying the Torah is to think about that it's not really linear, but it's a cycle. So in other words, what's going to happen is when we conclude the Torah, instead of looking at, okay, that's the end, but the way we read it on Simchat Torah is that we finish the final reading, and then we go right back to the beginning because it's a cycle. You finish, you go back to the beginning. And the reason why you go back to the beginning is because there's a deeper way of studying the Torah. So if you're going to read it that way, it's very interesting. The last word of the Torah is Le'inei Kol Yisrael. It describes the great things that Moses did, and all its strong hand and all the great awe which Moses performed before the eyes of all Israel. So it ends before the eyes of all Israel. It ends with a lamed. And then you turn to the next page, you go back to the first word of the Torah, Bereshit, in the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So what are you getting? So if you follow this concept that the end is rooted in the beginning, the end connects to the beginning because it's a cycle. It's not just a circle, but it's really a what do they call it? Like a spiral, not a spiral. Spiral is down. There's a word for a spiral going up, like a spiral staircase going up. So you keep coming around and around, but every time you're on a higher level. But in any case, so the end and the beginning have to be connected. And indeed, there's a beautiful word that can be combined from the last word of the Torah and the first word of the Torah. The last word of the Torah, we said, last letter of the Torah was Lamed. Yisrael, Israel, the last letter is Lamed. And the first word of Torah is Bet, or Bet. And that's, you put those two together and you get lev, you get heart. So somehow or another, the last word and the first word combine and they make their own word, which is a beautiful word, heart. Okay, heart is the place of vitality and life, etc. Okay, so is there something deeper here? So there's a beautiful commentary that I read, I forget who said it, and he says like this, he says that what the Torah is really telling you is that the end of the Torah will inform us about the beginning of the Torah. What is the end of the Torah? The end of the Torah talks about the greatness of Moses, the prophecy of Moses, and how all the miracles that Moses did in the eyes of all of Israel. So it's the miraculous. What is the beginning of the Torah? The beginning of the Torah is Bereshit bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created. So it describes creation. It describes the act of creation. Now, one way to think about this is when we think of creation, we think of nature. And when your person comes into the world, he's in the natural world, you see the natural laws. And today we understand much more of the natural laws, and we realize how so much of the world runs based on certain preset laws. So when you look at nature itself, you see nature, you don't necessarily see the hand of God. But when you understand, when you study the whole Torah, and you realize you talk about the meaning, and you talk about the recognizing Hashem's miracles, what that does is when you come back to the beginning, you recognize that creation itself is the miracle. And then you understand that there's two different models. It's not that there's a contradiction between the natural order and then the revelation of Hashem through prophecy or through miracles. No, the revelation and the miracles and the unexpected, they inform us and they allow us to revisit what we thought was just nature and understand that nature itself is actually an expression of Hashem's greatness. So when you finish the Torah, when you started the Torah, you started with nature and you move to miracles. When you finish with the miracles, you come back to nature and you understand that the nature itself is a miracle, that Hashem has multiple ways of expressing himself. One is through the unusual, through the unpredictable, but the other way is through the natural law and the natural order, which is an expression of Hashem's greatness. So thank you all for joining. As we usually say when we finish the Torah, Chazak, Chazak, Vanit Chazek, be strong, and may we be strengthened, and hopefully we can reconnect next Thursday and start the Torah anew at 10:15 with renewed excitement and passion, and we get to deeper dimensions in the study of Torah. So thank you for helping us conclude this cycle, and we should begin the new cycle in good health, in peace, harmony, and joy. Thank you. Toda Rabah.
Thanks, Rabbi Feldman.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.